relevant issues. So that's very important. So I just wanted to say that is the aim. We'll see if we can do it. So if anyone would like us to pause whilst they speak, then please let us know and we can absolutely action that. Hi Kate, how are you? Hi Dan.
Hello.
I was just explaining we're not using Jitsi for the first time because we're going to try and live stream it today. And then, so quite ambitious. We've used Teams just for this time. We're aiming to get back to an open source platform after this. And if anyone would like us to pause as it's being live streamed when they're talking, then that's absolutely fine. Just let us know. So to start then, I will just let you all know that we've had absences and apologies from Nia Davis from the HRC and also Amanda Brock from Open UK. I'm really pleased to see you all here today though for a discussion about AI in healthcare. I have to pay tribute to Liz Merrfield, who I saw at the Responsible AI event that we had in Cardiff very recently. And then I was really, really pleased, Liz, that you contacted me afterwards and said, can we do a session on this? Can we do a meeting on AI in healthcare? And to talk about your research along with your colleagues, Peter Giles and Kevin today. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context in terms of what's happening in the Senedd around this, which I'll be honest is not an awful lot at the moment in terms of policy, because I guess it's moving very quickly and infrastructure is a big part of this, and we're still very much getting the infrastructure right. But I would also, I'm very aware that there's so much going on in this space, and that's why this is a wonderful opportunity. My colleague Mike Hedges is here today. Nick is here from Mick Antonov's office as well, so that's really, really important. Hi Madeline. And I also just wanted to say that I have managed to the Equalities and Social Justice Committee, managed to get a short inquiry into, for example, looking at the NHS app through a data justice lens. We had Professor Lena Denzik from the Data Justice Lab at Cardiff University and Isabel Rorison as well provide some expert advice to us about that. So we're getting there, we're starting it. And I think at the end of the day, and this is what I think we all believe in, is that AI provides opportunities, absolutely, but we want it to be consensual, safe and transparent for all people. So I'm going to now pass over to Liz Merrfield, who is going to speak first with her colleague Peter, I believe. And then we are going to have Adam Friedman from the National AIDS Trust and also Sam Smith then from Medconfidential. But Liz, I believe you are the Information Governance Lead, Wales Cancer. Do you say that TRE project at the Department of Cancer and Genetics, Cardiff University? Wonderful. Yep. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to you now.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the opportunity for us to talk about our research. I think Peter's got a presentation so he can drive. Thanks very much, Brandon, for doing that, and for Peter. So we come at this as a bunch of people who are working within the School of Medicine in Cardiff University. There's Peter and myself and Kevin. So next slide, Peter, if that's okay. This is kind of like a brief tour of what we're going to be doing today, like setting the scene, who we've been working with over the last 18 months, the community that we've engaged with and their opinion of integrated research, the tensions within between the patient's perspective and what clinicians, what academics want to do, the challenges that we foresee that sort of come out of our kind of gap analysis that we've done, and the takeaways that are really important for members of this group to consider when they're pushing forward things within Welsh Government and within the Senedd. Next slide, please, Peter. So as we've said before, we've got Kevin Ashleford. So he's spearheaded this project of looking at the cancer TRE services in Wales. So this was a project that's funded to look at what services are available in Wales at the moment, what the appetites are for data integration, what's available at the moment, what's possible, and where we want to go within the research community, both from a clinical and an academic perspective. There's myself, and I come with a research governance and information governance hat on, and with Peter, who's a bioinformatician by background with an interest in genomics, machine learning and AI. And if we can kind of formulate this relationship where we're all quite happy, then Peter and I will actually be able to deliver something that makes, that's compliant as well as exciting. So that's where we come from. So next slide, Peter. So this project was funded back in April 2022, if I'm correct. And then so we had 2 years worth of funding. The funding was meant to be up in April this year, but fortunately we're extended to be working on it until 2025 in September, because there is a real appetite. We've had really positive engagements with a number of partners. And because there's a lot of work that needs to be done within Wales and within, and working within the UK. So we've been engaging with the cancer research community. So we've got really well-established colleagues within the Centre for Trials Research in Cardiff University. So they've got lots and lots and lots of, like thousands and thousands and thousands of clinical trial patients and so much data that's involved with that. So we've got the Wales Cancer Research Centre, Wales Gene Park, who are obviously a different aspect. They're involved in genomic research, generating that genomic data for researchers. We've got IPOC studentships, so interdisciplinary studentships for people to be doing PhDs within the data kind of domain. The Cardiff Experimental Cancer Medicine Centre, so they're doing advanced therapy trials for clinical trials for patients, so with hematological cancers, for example. We've been working with our colleagues in Swansea, Wales Cancer Biobank with SAIL Data Bank, so that's sort of like basically a lot of academics who are involved in this area. We've also been involved with the clinical kind of component of that. So those researchers who are patient facing, who see where there is a real data integration need. So because, they've got data, they see a problem in the clinic and they really want to make an impact within the clinic themselves. So we've been involved in like the All Wales Medical and Genomics Service, who generate data for diagnoses for patients. We've been involved with DHCW, who are the data side of NHS Wales, with a number of clinicians, and an office within Cardiff University called the Joint Research Office. So they're the research governance office that sits between Cardiff and Vale and Cardiff University to facilitate that research. And also outside of Wales, then Peter and I have also been involved with HDR UK, which is a number of data integration platforms throughout the UK, of which SAIL is one, and also within the Cancer Research UK community. So it's not just Wales that we're looking at. We're communicating and working with our partners over the border as well. So Peter, next slide, please. So there's a number of strategies that are there to guide us and to help us and to give context to us, and that Wales has been really, the forefront in doing the Wales delivery programme for Wales, but also involved in the Genome UK. So that's how genomic research is going to benefit patients in the future, how it's going to benefit precision medicine in the future, how it's going to design trials and stuff in the future. So how that data is going to be used for patient benefit in the future. We've got the CREST strategy as well, and we've also got DHCW. So we've got a number of strategies that kind of like lay the landscape of where we want that healthcare research to go within the future. And within all of these documents, it's, there's a real emphasis of using that data, using the data that's available at the moment to benefit those patients in the future. So giving access to researchers to be able to do the really valuable research that clinicians need to have evidence-based treatments for patients. Using in the CREST strategy, we've got in reference to using technologies, these new technologies, using AI, using machine learning models, and also DHCW, they got an eye on a slightly longer plan than the genomics delivery plan for Wales, and saying by 2030 they're going to have a really good secure data environment so we can do all this data integration. But there's a slight kind of we've got slightly shorter delivery plans for Wales for genomics and longer sort of strategies. So there's quite a lot that the Welsh kind of research and cancer community need to be working to kind of deliver on all of these. We've got Ben Goldacre and Lord O'Shaughnessy as well. They've also made some really good observations of how the data is being used and how it needs to be used in the future as well. So Ben Goldacre 2 years ago, was saying that we have again got all this data that's available, but we're not using it. We don't have the infrastructure in place to allow us to be able to use this data effectively to make those patient treatments, to facilitate those trials, for example, and we're not really building in the platforms to be able to do so. And the O'Shaughnessy report earlier on, which I'll come back to, I think, I'm not sure whether Peter or I will come back to later on, is how we're kind of using that data and kind of allowing our clinical colleagues to have the time to involve themselves in research, to kind of recognise those struggles that they see in the clinic and how that can be, how that sort of translates to research practice as well. Okay, next slide, Peter. So that's the kind of background. And that's what we kind of say at a really high level. But what really matters is what those people who are doing on a day-to-day basis, those clinicians, what do they see as the problems? Because we've got these great strategies, but how are we delivering on them? What are the problems with our delivery, for example? And we held an event. I say Peter held an event back in November last year within the university. But we had representatives there from DHCW. We had partners from the NHS. We had senior academics within the university, and senior research colleagues. We had a cross-disciplinary, cross-institutional meeting, and these are the kind of takeaways that we had. These were their opinion at the time. Like, governance is an issue, and you can't just have research and you can't just have access, but it's all the processes that you have to go to, and the NHS infrastructure isn't there, and these are big things, and it doesn't take you can't just take one of these away and all those problems will go away. It's a really complicated issue there are numerous big challenges here. So Peter, next slide, please. And what do we need more of? This is it's quite a good question to ask people and to kind of take away this data. What do we need? Do we need more strategies? Well, no, because we've got quite a lot of high level strategies with detail in them. And do we need more pilot projects to actually deliver on these? Well, yes, we do need more projects to do that, and a really focused vision as well. So yeah, we've got a strategy. We don't need to kind of overlay that with another strategy, but we need those individual kind of projects to be able to deliver on this. And again, this is outputs from that meeting. So this is the really kind of collective view that we've got of those kind of those projects that we're trying to deliver on at the moment. And also, what do the patient and the public want? This is the thing that really matters to clinicians and to researchers and to funders as well, which is a really important thing. What do patients want from their data, from the use of their data, and what we're going to do with their data in the future. And it's well acknowledged that the report from the HTA and the HRA was produced back in 2018 that patients are happy for their data to be used if they understand what's going to happen to their data, how it's going to be used, and that they're kept informed in the process of that. Over in England, they've got a patient group called Use My Data, and they're really strong advocates of the utility of that data within the right setting, with the right governance applied, with the right levels of transparency and safeguards in place. And over here in Wales, the Wales Cancer Biobank, so they're a bank of patients, the patients who've consented to, if they've had a cancer diagnosis, so they've got a sample, so a biopsy sample that's taken, they consent to having that sample not then just put into the incinerator, but that's being used for future generations, for looking at the pathology of that data, looking at what could happen to that data, using that sample for research. And there's a really these are quite diverse kind of areas. You've got samples, you've got HTA sit over everything, and also a patient group, and it all says, use my data, please, we need to use it, but there have to be safeguards in place. And we completely accept that as a bunch of researchers, and we're trying to find that middle ground, which is quite difficult. And Peter's going to kind of elaborate on the massive jigsaw that we don't quite know how big or how 3D or how many pieces are involved in this jigsaw. So I'll hand over to Peter at this point, if that's okay.
Sorry, lost control of the slides. So as Liz says, we've got high level stuff. We're going to bring lots of data together. We're generating more and more data. But what does it actually look like from sort of the coal face and the ground? Well, I would say we're very fragmented. So this is just something we put together showing all the different places where data sits at the moment. We've got stuff within the NHS. The NHS isn't one homogenous organisation. We've got to go and talk to different departments, different health boards. We've got stuff going on within the academic community, things like the data banks with SAIL, and we've got biobanks and things like that. And then we've got all the different bits that are going on within the research community. And what we find as we've been going through with the cancer community is we've got all these pockets that we need to bring together. And to give an example of a current trial that's just launching in Cardiff at the moment, this is the sort of bits of information that we need to bring together to facilitate that trial. And every one of those arrows is a new conversation. It's a new bit of paperwork. It's a new conversation about governance. It's one organization that think differently to another. So one of the big challenges to enable all this exciting stuff to happen is to simplify it and get everybody working together, because at the moment it's a little bit of a gold rush and everybody's trying to exploit their competitive advantage, which is, probably a good thing. One of the interesting things as researchers is that, we go where the excitement is, and that there is stuff happening across the border and things that, we need to be aware of. And on the face of it, and I take some of it with a pinch of salt, because when you dig a little bit deeper, maybe it's not so great. There are some really exciting opportunities that are possibly a little bit ahead of us where we are in Wales with what the possibilities are. And that's interesting, because the future to do things in like rare disease is going to be bringing these data sets together across borders. You've got a rare cancer. There won't be enough cases just if we stick within Wales. We need to look across the UK and internationally to bring that together. So our solutions need to work with other people. This whole thing about data linkage is about working together. This is a group that's clearly interested in, digital democracy and doing the right thing. So I thought it was an interesting thing to reflect on our experiences of trying to bring all these different types of cancer data together to do this sort of, advanced analytics, AI, that type of thing. And I think an observation is that there's often tensions between what should happen and who's, and how who should decide. So you talk to a patient, they're very much, no, I want you to make me better. You can have my data. You can do what you want with it. But then you talk to the public, the well patient, and they're much more concerned. Within the health service, clinicians are very much going, no, we've got this data. I can see it on my system. You should just be able to do things with it. But we then talk to the NHS managers. We talk to the governance experts within the trust. And it's obviously a very different picture. There's a tension between what the research academic thinks should happen. Sorry, the research clinician thinks should happen and sort of their bosses and the like. Within research, Liz and I have spent the last 18 months or so sparring a little bit between each other. I'm a researcher that wants stuff to happen. Liz is trying to keep me in my box and go, you can't do that. You've got to follow these processes. So we're constantly in tension. And I guess that follows through into the work of the Assembly, that there's a tension between the opportunities and the things you want to provide for people and the rights of society to say, well, I want this to happen and not. So there is a lot of tension. I think probably my reflection is that all this tension is a good thing, and it's actually that the checks and balances, if we cut the string on any one of them, it maybe would change that balance. And whilst progress is slow, certainly my experience moving this area, I haven't seen much evidence of bad practice. If anything, people are worried about doing the wrong thing. Another event that Liz organised back in December was one looking at governance around healthcare data. And one of the things that she did was got an artist to come along who sat on the side and did various pictures as we were going through. And one of the pictures that the artist distilled from the conversation that was happening in the room with about sort of 70 odd people there was one about the anxiety, the desire to do the right thing, the challenges of accountability. If I do that, am I going to get into trouble for it? So certainly our experience within the research community is that it's less Wild West and people doing the wrong things that we sometimes read in some of those press reports. And actually, there's anxiety about doing the wrong thing that's possibly holding us up. Another big observation, the complexity of what this involves is really misunderstood. I talked to a clinician who just says, oh, well, we got the data there and all we need to do is this, this and this, and we'll be able to work out why this particular group don't respond or something like that. But actually, there's so much that happens under the surface. It's the technologies, the infrastructure, the dealing with that data, and ultimately the trust between people to bring it together. And I think as we're all moving into this area of sort of, data linkage and advanced data science, there's a definite lack of understanding of that complexity. we've got a big problem about organisation priorities. And, you know, I go back to that earlier slide where I showed you the sort of 20 odd different sort of things involved in pulling this together. Not one of us is prioritising this that goes along with those strategies and that excitement. There is definite deprioritisation. And I guess we're in a world where everybody's got their day job. This is something new. How do you resource it and how do you make it happen? But it's an anchor to all that enthusiasm as a problem. Ultimately, we need new ways of working, and that's what bringing people together the end of last year did. This was very much, we used the unconference concept where people decided what they wanted to talk about. They had those conversations, and it was all about, you know, what are we going to do to make those changes? What was interesting is it broke down into a few areas that we need to work better together. We need to develop those gateway services so that you're, you know, as a researcher, you're not trying to bring a dozen different groups together when you want to do something. Organisations all need better processes to deal with data. Within the university at the moment, we've been spending 6 months trying to get some reuse of some clinical trials data. Everybody says it should be possible, but we're not quite sure what the paperwork process is to do it. So it's just going very slowly. And obviously, you know, everybody's aware we need to take our patients and public along with us. But there's good work happening already. You look at some of the requirements that the community said, and we can already see that there's sort of there's work happening. So I can see we're over time already. To leave you with a couple of takeaways. There's a lot of data available, but it isn't necessarily accessible yet. It is very much, you know, the picture of the messy bookshop. How do you find it? How do you get permission to sort of check it out of the library and things like that? And the second one is that we all need those incentives to work better. How do we create the time to make those changes that are necessary and things like that? So they would be the couple of takeaways for you. And I'll stop there.
Wow, I have to say that was absolutely incredible. The way that you have linked everything up on that presentation to make us and help us understand, and all the work that you're doing, all the conversations that are happening and what needs to be done is incredible. I would actually love a copy of that artist drawing as well. I think that was so poignant, and is very much, I think, the concerns of a lot of people really, and they obviously really captured that. And you know, as you both said, really the purpose of this group is to have more conversation about this. I want there to be more conversation in society and with the public, so that people can be really incorporated into the decisions that are being made and going to be made. So thank you both very, very much. If anybody has any questions, we're going to keep them until the end, if that's okay, because we're going to hear from all of our speakers today. I have a couple as well, which I've noted down. So thank you both, Liz and Peter, and we're going to move on now to Adam. So thank you very much, Adam, for being here today. I understand that National AIDS Trust has been doing some work or some collaboration with Open Rights Group, and that's very, very interesting to us. So I will hand over to you now, Adam. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Hope you can see my slides. Shout if you can't. Great. So the National AIDS Trust, just to explain who we are. So we're the UK's HIV rights charity, but our specific focus is on policy and campaigning, and that's across all 4 nations. The bulk of what I'm talking about today is about the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, which many of you may know about, but in case you don't, that's current bill going through the UK Parliament in Westminster, which will have implications across all 4 nations about data protection. And I'm here to just sort of explain about HIV and how that links up. And I think it brings forward some important debates about data privacy. So yeah, as many of you will know, that the UK government's aim with this bill is to kind of flex the UK away from the EU GDPR framework for the purposes of innovation in a post-Brexit context. But I think the voice that NAT can add is a bit different, because we come to this from a very different angle, and the angle we come to it from is an anti-discrimination angle. So NAT run a discrimination advice service. So people anywhere in the UK who are living with HIV, who might experience discrimination based on their status, can come to us, and we will connect them to sort of free legal advice to find out if they've got a legal case. So in the past 18 months since we've had the service in its current formal form, a quarter of all the cases that have been presented to us have been about people having their HIV status shared without their consent. And this happens in a variety of different settings, but most commonly in the workplace, in healthcare, by the police, or by people in their personal lives. And these breaches occur for a number of reasons, but quite often they come from good enough intentions. So people do it because they believe it's necessary to safeguard someone's health or to prevent an HIV transmission, even though, of course, the science doesn't really back up. It's very hard to transmit HIV in reality. And these intentions are, they're, like I said, they are good intentions, but they're misguided at best, but can be actively dangerous at the worst. So we know from the casework that we deal with that people who have their HIV status shared without their consent can experience real world harm. So harassment, bullying, isolation, sometimes even the threat of or actual violence. So we're talking about really important harms and a real problem that we all need to get to grips with. It's also important to note that sometimes the sharing of status isn't done for good reasons. Sometimes it's just malicious because of the stigma that still exists today, unfortunately, with HIV, and people are still afraid and uneducated in some respects. And that's how we approached analysing this bill when it popped up last year, because we believe quite firmly that people living with HIV, or indeed anybody really with their health data, should have the right to control their data and only have it shared at a time when it's either with their explicit consent or where it's genuinely 100% necessary, because of those harms that I've just outlined. So just explain briefly what we find what some of our issues with the bill are. There's only a few, but they're quite big, really, in our mind. So the first is Clause 5, which looks at the definition of personal data in UK law in general. But at the end, there's sort of a subclause which looks at how data is transmitted internally in workplaces. And the way it's been written is very broad brush and ambiguous. It says that it is okay to transmit data internally in a workplace if that's necessary for, the quote is, for internal administrative purposes. It's a very broad few words. We're concerned that given the breaches that happen in the workplace being the most common setting, we're concerned that that's not enough guidance, essentially, for what an administrative purpose is. Then the second clause is clause 19. It's a very small clause that seeks to remove a part of the Data Protection Act 2018 that currently exists for police. Police currently have to justify why they've accessed an individual's personal data, such as if someone's in police custody, let's say, and they want to, via this clause, take this justification requirement out, which is not sensible in our view, because in cases of police misconduct with HIV data, we've dealt with a few, we need that evidence, really. And then the final one is throughout the Schedules 5 and 6, which deal with a new regime for international data transfers. HIV is particularly, like I said, stigmatized, and in other countries that's far more pronounced. People are at risk of, criminalization if they transmit HIV to someone. They're at risk of much higher risk of physical violence, things like that. And we think that what the bill is trying to do, which is to put all of these powers on which countries are suitable to transfer data to onto the Secretary of State, is not really it's an actor that's not really impartial enough to make that decision. So we think that really it should be the regulator, the ICO, should probably be making this decision, and I'll come back to that towards the end of the presentation, which is where we link in with the Open Rights Group in particular. But basically, we don't think any of these measures were intended to cause HIV status sharing and making it worse, but we think these might exacerbate this existing problem unintentionally. So where are we with the campaign? So we've been campaigning on this with the bill since its through most of its Westminster stages, it's a painfully slow process because the bill keeps being pushed onto the back burner by other pieces of legislation. So at the report stage in the Commons last November, we worked with a Labour MP, Kate Osborne, to table 6 amendments to tackle the 3 issues that I just set out. And one of these, which was about employment, was selected for a vote, which we were really pleased about. And that was basically asking the government to say the law that as it already is, so they don't have to create any confusion in employment, which we were concerned about. We got a lot of support, so 200 MPs across 6 political parties voted for support. So that's a huge cross-party consensus. However, the Westminster government decided to vote the measure down, saying that they agreed with it, but they felt it was unnecessary, which seemed a bit bizarre to us. The vote was only lost by 76 votes, so we took that as a sign that there was real appetite for this, so we're continuing to push forward through the Lords. And off the back of that, we've met with officials at DSIT and the Home Office last month. It was a very productive conversation, and they were very pleasant. I don't think there's much agreement between us on whether the amendments are necessary or not. We think we have ways forward if the bill is enacted as it is currently drafted. And I think there's a productive relationship there, but we still think that these amendments would be valuable. So we're therefore working with a Liberal Democrat peer, Lord Clement Jones, and he's agreed to table these amendments again for the Lord stages, and we'll see what the outcome of that will be. So the last bit really is about the ICO's independence, and like I said, this is where we link in with the Open Rights Group in particular. So the ICO, as the independent data protection regulator across the whole of the UK, is a really vital should be a really vital actor in making sure that people's data rights are protected. And we think in this context of people's HIV status being shared without their consent, we really need them to be able to use their powers to sanction organisations that quite clearly break the law. And as a result, with our discrimination advice, when people experience these breaches, we will often encourage them to make a report to the ICO. And people living with HIV do generally have the confidence that the ICO is an independent regulator and that they do act on an impartial basis. It's not to say the ICO deal with all cases perfectly. They certainly haven't dealt with everything that well, but we've actually been working with the ICO on some work to try and get them to understand their processes a bit better and to prioritise the needs of people living with HIV on a more strategic and sensitive basis, because the Equality Act gets brought up in a lot of this, and it's about ensuring that they are fulfilling their Equality Act responsibilities and making sure these things are dealt with in good time and with good sensitivity. So we think the ICO in its current form, there's lots of room to work with them. And these concerns aren't obviously party political. We're just here to protect people's data rights. But we have concerns that some of the amendments the government have suggested as well about the independence of the ICO. A lot of the things they're suggesting will give the Secretary of State greater power to decide the ICO's priorities, how it operates in many ways, and these are quite far-reaching powers. And it's a lot of faith to put in either a current or a future Secretary of State. We don't know who Secretaries of State of the future will be. And given that there are these real-world harms experienced by marginalised groups, such as those living with HIV, it's a real concern for us if we don't have an independent data protection regulator. We need someone that's independent and that can hold government to account, partially because many of these real-world breaches happen in government or public sector settings, such as the NHS, the police, or indeed government departments. We think future governments shouldn't be able to mark their own homework when they're looking at whether they're protecting individuals' data. And so we're supporting a lot of the Open Rights Group's amendments in the DPDI bill in this area for that reason. That's it really. We've got a op-ed on the Politics Home website, which you can Google, or you can click on the link. I can share the link around if you want to read about it in more detail. And if you have questions, I can answer them later or via email. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You gave us so much information there and also just made it so human, Adam, which I think, again, is what we're always trying to do. And honestly, the real world impact of these data breaches cannot be underestimated. I would also add in This is something that I've raised in questions in the to DHCW when we've been talking about the NHS app. For example, I've tried to explain that there are things which aren't illegal on our medical records, but still carry a huge amount of stigma, and that includes mental health, sexual health. I've given the example, of people who have had abortions. That's not something that you would want to be public, but obviously absolutely needs to be on your medical records, would need to be shared with other clinicians. So it's just how do we go about making sure that that those things are always shared with the only people who need to see them and with consent. And I'm just going to also pop something in the chat as well for you to be aware of. This was another aspect of this is a joint letter on concerns around survivors of domestic abuse and violence and their anxieties about their medical records being shared. As I've said, there's positives, there's opportunities here. If I went into hospital in North Wales and I was unconscious particularly, and I needed my clinicians to be able to see my medical records, of course, there is a very real need for that and importance of that. But, on the other hand, this joint letter, without those safeguards and that governance, as we've discussed today, being in place, have actually encouraged women not to join up to the app. When we discussed it with our Senedd advisory group, they said that actually they would consider no longer going to see their GP or engaging with medical services if they thought that this was a risk. So again, just very, very real kind of concerns. And I bring it back to that artist's, painting, really. Those anxieties can have some really, real kind of like consequences. So that brings me on nicely then to Sam from Medconfidential. I'm really pleased to have you here with us again, Sam Smith. The Medconfidential always says every use of data should be consensual, safe and transparent in matters of health and care. Your relationship with your doctor is based on a very human spirit of confidentiality, not the cold law of data protection. Although I have to say, I think that James, you are down there today for us, all of us trying to put those amendments in place and fighting for those digital and human rights. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Sam. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. So, hi, I'm Sam from Medconfidential. We normally focus on England, largely because Wales doesn't screw up very much, whereas England, tends to. So thank you for not creating us too much work. Medconfidential believes that every data use should be consensual, safe and transparent. People want to use ever more data for ever more purposes, and what should and can be done should be used. Data should be used in ways that people want and not in ways they don't. And that's easy for me to say. There's no simple answer. As we've just heard, for patients with HIV, there are people who believe it's a chronic disease where there should be no stigma and they want their data used to reflect that. And then there are other people who believe that no stigma would be wonderful, but in their real world there is, so their data needs to be specially protected. Both are entirely correct, and the system has to accept both positions, get it right perfectly every time. Which is why novel and unique data access takes time, even if researchers who never see the patients and have no obligations to the patients think it should be easier. But, Nat have given that bit of my talk. No ethical researcher should want to use data that the data subject has objected to or would object to. And, the patient doesn't really want to do the work. That's what the system and the infrastructure is for. And SAIL is a good example of Wales doing infrastructure well. SAIL will exist for as long as the Welsh government stands behind it. English government, Westminster didn't want to stand behind it and keeps going round in circles, which takes up a heck of a lot of time. So I will briefly cover two things that England won't do where Wales can lead on digital health data and safety. So Sarah just talked about the importance of access for care. Wales has something called the National Intelligent Integrated Audit Solution, and I have no idea how you pronounce that in Welsh. Basically, it logs what record was accessed from where and when. Somebody accesses a record for clinical care, line drops in a database. So if someone looks up your record as a member of the Senedd or as a member of the public, or even just somebody randomly talking on YouTube, you can ask an IAS where and when your record was accessed. Please just tell me. It minimizes abuse via audit of those accesses. If you think your record's been accessed, you go ask them and they tell you. So why not make that proactively visible in the NHS Wales app? Because at the moment, you have to know that your record was accessed to know to go and ask whether it was accessed. And, how do you figure that out? And that's actually not the best reason to do it all. It's a really good one. It gives people reassurance that their data was accessed for their care. If you show up at A&E and your record isn't accessed, there's a question there too about your direct care. And the NHS in England and separately the NHS in Wales spends massive amounts of money on lots of very big and complex systems that no bugger uses for anything. And if these things work, we should probably use them. And if they don't work, we probably should stop putting the data in them. How do we get a better conversation about NHS data? Well, let's show patients how it's used for direct care, which requires greater transparency and accountability to build confidence. And that's why England won't do it. So, Wales should. NIAS is a thing that makes data in the Welsh NHS safer, and NHS England is just nowhere. So I was supposed to be talking about AI. All the projects from Merrfield that created so many discoveries and so much news, all of them used about 2 weeks of Merrfield's data. Not very much. They needed very high quality data to build an AI that can tell gender from a retina scan, or the nerve damage in your eye, which predicts Parkinson's. But, it's not much data. Once you know it's possible, you need even less data. Now, England takes a view that should have very large, very expensive AI projects with millions of pounds going to a few organisations to build them, which turn around and charge every hospital money for the thing they just built because it costs millions of pounds to do. It's kind of mad, but, welcome to England. The hard thing with AIs is knowing what works. Nothing will work, everything might. Let's throw it at a wall and see what sticks. We didn't know LLMs would work. Now we do. And then we have a bunch of them because many people can train models on copyrighted data. But once you know that an optician can measure heart disease because the blood vessels in your eye aren't really any different to the blood vessels in your heart, what the R&D institutions of Wales can do is take that innovation, which is published on the front page of Nature, and create a tested algorithm cheaply and freely available to the world. Merrfield's is not really doing that. Who can do it for everybody? Like generic drugs. The marginal cost of analysing a picture of an eye is pretty cheap. And in a decade, the camera on your cell phone will take the picture. It can already analyse the picture, it just can't take it. What I see in England is being told to maximise the profit of the data. But, you can't profit off the data because everybody's got their own data. Wales has plenty of data and plenty of smart people who can make those tools available and integrate them into healthcare. How does healthcare change when, measuring heart disease is a matter of taking a picture of your own eye with your own smartphone camera? We'll get there. Similarly, we'll figure out how a blood test for cancer might work. It'll be replicated. England will keep spending massive sums for branded AIs. There will be generics. Where are they going to come from? None of this research, none of these things require data on people who don't want their data used, which is probably what you thought I'd talk about, but that bit's quite quick. In England, it's 5%. Do you get any less efficiency out of the AIs with 5% less data? No, it makes no difference at all. So you may as well respect people's wishes, because then you don't have to worry about whether or not you are or not. You can't be an ethical researcher using data on people who don't want their data used. And, people shouldn't have to infer what you're doing. They should be able to read it because you should tell them. And if you tell them everything, they give up reading at some point and everybody's happy. Going to some of the talk, it's not the good people who think they're doing good things with data that destroy projects and destroy public trust. What destroys projects and destroys public trust is secrecy and people making decisions that the rules and the safeguards shouldn't apply to them. Researchers who are focused on their research often think they're good people doing good things, which they are, but some people think that the rules are for other people, like Boris Johnson. So as I hand back to Sarah, there are things Wales can do, and in a rough attempt to put some Welsh into this talk, diolch for not screwing up, and please don't stop.
Thank you, Sam. That's wonderful. It's very interesting that you said about that's the only thing I've been requesting in my Health and Social Care Committee and the Equality and Social Justice Committee. Whenever we're talking about this, I'm like, just give an option so that people can see who's accessed their medical records. I was like, as you said, it is about the reassurance, and it is then about the transparency and accountability. I received anecdotal evidence that they do this offline. They know that sometimes people will access medical records that they're not meant to, and there is a ping that's sent to the top, and people are called in and they are disciplined if necessary. So this is absolutely something that happens. So this would be something that could make a huge difference. Seem to be in this place at the moment where it's kind of like, if you want it, then fine, but there needs to be more funding allocated to be able to design it and incorporate it. That's kind of where we are at the moment with that. It's also, I will say, we do have to learn from what has happened in England. And one of the things that I don't want to happen on the flip side is that because it didn't go well in England twice, with rolling this out and the public confidence just totally dropping off, that we don't offer an option to opt out as a result of that. That for me would be absolutely awful, abhorrent, really. Like, I just and I say to all of my colleagues and people who work for my colleagues here today that we really have to be very aware of that threat, I would say, to internalize that, what happened in England with it going wrong, and then just not offer the option to opt out to prevent it from happening. That's not the way to prevent it from happening. Everything that we've heard today is the way to bring people with us. So I want to say thank you all to all of our speakers, and I'm going to ask now if anybody has any questions, and if you do, then to raise your hand or to raise it on the Teams chat. Kate, would you like to come in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, everyone, for just a really interesting discussion, some really interesting sort of case studies about what's happening in this area at the moment. One of the things that struck me across all three of the talks that we heard was sort of, the problem that we're sort of grappling with at the moment is this problem of transparency. Sort of, how do you go about sort of ethically using someone's data in a way that is sort of beneficent, and keeping it safe and keeping them informed at the same time. We have this huge problem around sort of informed consent around people's health data. And I wondered if anyone had any thoughts on what would be needed to sort of build a model of transparency into our data use to sort of to help overcome these problems. It's a massive question, and it's okay if you don't have an answer, because I don't.
No, it's an excellent question, Kate, as always. Kevin, I know that you're here to answer some questions, so if you don't mind, I'm gonna come to you first and get your thoughts on this.
Right. Well, as you say, a massive question, and I put my hand up and say I don't have the answer to it either. I think all we can do is focus on the improving the information governance procedures we have in place. As Peter and Liz's presentation highlighted, governance is a real tricky area, and that is holding us back and is restricting academics, researchers, administrators, and so on from doing anything. Now, with more governance people working in this area, I think transparency will arise, because there is an appetite for to be transparent, but like me, we don't know how to actually achieve it. So I can't really answer the question, Kate. I apologise. It is a big question. It is one we're trying to sort of edge towards. With the Cancer TRE project that Peter and Liz are working on, we're focusing on case studies, specific use cases that can then tease out the sort of questions like this. I think it's very dangerous sometimes for a sort of design from the top down. It's sort of you do need some concrete examples to stress test, and that's what we are trying to do. So I can't answer that question, but hopefully the case studies that we're exploring will get us to that point. I'll pause now, and perhaps Peter, you might have something more illuminating to add.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you, Peter.
I was just going to say a slightly different perspective. Within the trusted research secure data environment community, there's a lot of talk about the difference between trusted data and environments and trusted people. We focus very much on locking down the data and accessing the data. And that's where the data controllers get very scared by all the legislation. One of the interesting ideas, and I know Liz has a very different view on this to me, is the idea of trusting people more. And that this idea about some form of personal passport that says, you know, I'm Peter, I work for Cardiff University, I've undertaken a certain level of training or whatever. But all that does is identifies me. I then need visas to do things. So if I'm working in healthcare and cancer, maybe I could get a visa that gets me access to cancer data sets, but it wouldn't give me access to the women's health data or the mental health data that are problematic. So I think it's a way of thinking about things differently. And people are going to be at the center of all the solutions to this, because, you know, we can do great things, but we can do a lot of damage. I'll stop there.
I think it's a long-term thing. It's also down to how research is funded as well, and how those responsibilities, like data custodianship, it's quite difficult within research, because research projects might last 3 years, and it's the bit that you kind of fall off a cliff after that of what happens to that data, who is responsible for that data, how it's like held, and how it's kind of used afterwards. So it's an infrastructure thing, really. So it comes down to people, it comes down to expertise with governance and everything. But it's that kind of, the whole model of research is kind of like, it doesn't really accommodate for these like really exciting data integration projects where you might need to go back to ask people if you can use this data. Things might need to change. You might need new privacy information, notices, because actually the usage is fairly similar, but you know, people still want to be informed of that. But the model doesn't really work, and it is kind of changing that status quo, and it's quite hard because we're doing something that's quite exciting and not been done before, and those governance rules that apply at the moment, there is an appetite by patients to kind of challenge those rules, and there's no point having rules for rules' sake. But you know, that kind of that process of change is quite kind of, it can be quite laborious and quite restrictive for researchers who just want to do the shiny things, as Peter said before.
No, and I appreciate all of you have been so incredibly candid. I think this is why as well, though, what you were saying, Adam, and what you're doing, James, as well, working on, you know, the UK government, though, are trying to put through legislation which would just undermine all of this. And it really concerns me that everything that they've put forward in this bill, and other bills actually, don't have people like you and people like we have in the room today at the heart of it. It doesn't seem like they're talking to any of you or listening to any of you. Sam, I also just wanted to ask your thoughts on this, because you also just touched on something about the funding, you know, and I don't want, you know, AI and all of this innovation and opportunity to be sucked into the kind of like private sector sphere where, like you said, they can, you know, kind of like, you know, it's millions and billions of pounds that will be put into it, and then who ultimately ends up kind of like paying for this? Like, isn't there a kind of way of creating this and designing all of this new technology and innovation that is like everyone said, is from the ground up, is not seen as just another profit making scheme?
Yes. I think the answer to do with all of the big expensive ones is to just completely ignore them and go, what we would like is, you know, an open source tool as quickly as possible for as much use as possible. And, you know, it's a bit different, but, you know, open source algorithms exist. All of the stuff 111 and the Welsh equivalent uses a published flowchart. You know, yes, they put it into chatbots and a bunch of other things, but it's a flowchart. You know, if somebody wants to build a very expensive AI that shows something works, it's like, okay, we'll figure it out how. And to go back to your question about how you get transparency into the NHS app, you do what you can, when you can. You know, perfect would be great, but don't make perfect the enemy of better. So the thing when I keep pitching this to NHS England, and they really wish I wouldn't, what I say to them is they should simply announce that from the 1st of January next year, patients will automatically be able to see when their record is accessed. And you just need to tell NHS Wales staff that. Like, if you're going to be creepy, do it on the 30th of December, not on the 2nd of January. And, you know, like, it's one of those, we've got a year to figure it out. We'll do some more detail. It doesn't really matter if it takes a bit longer than that, but basically just say to staff, from the 1st of January, don't be creepy bastards. And, that will probably get you over that hump. How you do the comms, how you make that work will need a bit of effort, but like give people a deadline after which you can just turn it on retroactively. The default from the 1st of January is that, like, you can see that list today. You should remind people that if you're creepy and somebody finds out, they can ask for the list. But, like, everyone just assumes that nobody will. Like, from the 1st of January, it'll be proactive. And, that's how you actually get over the hump. Is it going to be a bit messy? Yes. Are there some people for whom you would probably not want it turned on by default? Yes. Is that going to need a bit of iteration, a bit of work? Yes. But how do you actually start the process for, members of the Senedd, anybody with a public profile who's like, I want to know how my record's been accessed, have it available and just say very clearly to staff who have access to these records, from the 1st of January, if you're creepy, you will get caught. Stop it. And preferably, stop it yesterday.
Yes, thank you very much, Sam. And just to say, it is something about the staff, but we do have also issues about coercive control when people have access to all of their information on their phone as well, if they're in an abusive relationship. And I just want to reiterate as well what Dan Rose has said. I think instead of a trusted person, a trusted purpose is also, which I think really, Peter, is what you were saying. It's the person with the purpose, where a clause of outcome from it can't be used for profit by license, which I think is a really interesting way of thinking about it. So thank you, Dan. And finally, because we're going to have to wrap up in a moment, I'm going to bring in James Baker from Open Rights Group.
Thank you, Sarah. I just wanted to pick up on that point around trust and how we can kind of improve governance and transparency. At Open Rights, we do believe passionately a lot of that is around getting the regulator and the ICO right, and we do think, unfortunately, the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill is a step backwards. I just wanted to flag a couple other things that are happening with that. One, it's going to grant the regulator discretionary powers to ignore complaints. So if someone did have a complaint around their health records being accessed and they put a complaint to the ICO, then at the moment, they've got a statutory obligation to investigate that, whereas they could turn around and say, actually, we're so overwhelmed with complaints, we're just going to ignore these complaints at the moment until you've gone back to the person who the complaint's about and tried to resolve it for them. So also, we've seen recently where you do have big scandals, organisations trying to bring collective complaints, whether that's a trade union bringing a complaint or a health campaigning organisation on behalf of patients. And we really think there ought to be changes in the law to enable organisations to bring joint complaints on behalf of collective organisations, and that would in some way help triage complaints because you could kind of say, well, if lots of people are involved in it and it's coming from behalf of an organisation, then the regulators probably ought to spend a bit more attention to it. But also in terms of the complexities of getting your governance right, people rely on a regulator to help issue guidance so that organisations can get there's quite often complex issues of governance right with their data. So just wanted to come in and say that, it's very much live. We've got some amendments in the laws that have been tabled at committee stage, so we do hope there might be some movement. But I'd encourage all members of the Welsh Senedd to kind of take a look at this and how it would impact on their constituents.
Absolutely. Thank you, James. And I think just to sum up, I suppose, is that the research that I did with the Data Justice Lab at Cardiff University was actually talking to the trade unions about AI that was coming into the workplace. And the number one issue that they raised, all of them, I think it was over 17 of them, was mission creep. And I think that that's very much the same here. It's just that there is a plethora, there are just far too many, and James, you touched on some, and all of us have mentioned some of those case studies today, where people kind of use it for what it wasn't intended for what you didn't consent to, and that's happening in all sectors and to many kind of people. And Adam, you gave a very clear example of that today. That's a real fear that people have, and is very justified, very, very justified. So I completely agree that the governance in place would empower really researchers, to be able to get on and do what you need to do, and I think just empower people and society to really engage and be part of something that can be transformational and save lives in many ways. And I also agree with you, of course, James, about the collectives. That's the issue with GDPR as well. It's very much about the individual. It's not about the collective. There is power in the people and being able to come together. And that's what many of us are trying to achieve here. So I just want to say a huge thank you for all of you coming. We've live streamed this, I believe, and recorded it today, which is really good. I'm really glad that we started doing this because this was invaluable, truly. I will have a chat with James and Brandon afterwards, because I think this would actually be a really good topic for us to revisit. I think that there's so many different aspects that we can get into on this. If any of you have any ideas for other topics or anything that you'd like to follow up on with this, then please get in touch and let me know. And I hope to see you all at the next one. But please let me know if there's anything you want to share with me afterwards. So thank you all very much. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day and week. Bye, everyone.